is what is one thing that you own that you really should throw out?
The chair I'm sitting in. I'm not getting up so you can see it, but it is a ratty piece of furniture. It's got to go.
It's
Oh
broken
man.
in. Hi, everyone. From 1Route, I'm Jeffrey Ross, along with my co-host Alysa Giles, and you're watching the 1Route Roundup, the show that spotlights individuals and companies making a positive difference in the telecom industry. Today, we are joined by the man, the myth, Pierce Gorman. Pierce is currently a distinguished member of the technical staff at Numerical, providing leadership and strategic direction for Numerical's product and engineering division to build the next generation of enterprise voice solutions. He has previously worked as principal engineer systems architecture at T-Mobile and an incredible career with Sprint spanning 32 years, serving in roles from routing analyst to senior network design engineer, an inventor and co-inventor on 19 patents, and serving on multiple committees in various capacities with the Alliance for Telecommunications Industry Solutions, also known as ADIS. Pierce, welcome to the show. Pierce, one thing that we like to do and how we like to start the show each time is asking our guest, where in the world are you today?
I am in Lee Summit, Missouri, which is a suburb of Kansas City.
There you go.
Did you want more than that? I mean,
oh, hey, I guess also that's in the United States for everybody.
Yes, it's in the U.S. That's right.
There you
For
go.
people who aren't familiar with our geography. Yep.
There you go.
Yes, yes. Something else that we always love to hear about is our guest's journey and kind of how they got to where they are today. So can you tell us a little bit what originally got you into the telecoms industry?
Yes, it was a phone call from a friend, and he was a programmer, and he had worked, doesn't really matter, I guess, where he worked, but he called and he said, "Hey, I'm reprogramming my Casio watch, and I was checking to see if your phone number was still valid." So he talked and said that he was working at Sprint. And I said, "Oh, neat. Do you need any programmers?" And he said, "Yeah, we do." So he set me up an interview. I got hired, and that was in 1988. I did that for a year or so. I didn't enjoy it, and I had been given job responsibilities to support data networks in the department. And I was fascinated by what I learned about data communications protocols. And I said, well, I don't really enjoy programming, but I really enjoy this data communication stuff. I'm going to change my career path and become a data network design engineer. So I kept pestering people I knew in the operations system support data network design group at Sprint, and they eventually took me on. And I did that for about 11 or 12 years. And towards the end of that, we did a lot of work with voice over IP for a large important business, large important carrier customer. And so I studied up and became the lead session border controller design engineer. So a session border controller is a voice over IP firewall of sorts. And it also does a lot of SIP protocol fix up for things where SIP makes it difficult to have a call work end to end. So they're a kind of a Swiss Army knife that you use in the call path to make things work. At the end of that, I was working as a network planner and as a voice architect. There's this long story there, but in any case, I found myself working with the ADIS SIP Forum Joint Task Force on IPN&I, and we were first looking at network-to-network interconnection standards or best practices. And then we got hit up by the FCC to say, hey, can you look at what we can do about number spoofing and the scam calls that are just plaguing the United States? And so we began the work on what became the stir-shaken call authentication technology. And I've been working on that since 2013. I was the lead engineer at Sprint for the stir-shaken implementation there. And then when Sprint was acquired by T-Mobile, I went to work in the group that managed their call authentication and anti-robocall analytics.
I was going to say, the real question is, do you ever call up that old friend and blame him for getting you into this mess?
So that old friend ended up getting very upset about his job at Sprint, and we got into an argument, and I really haven't talked to him since he quit. So, and that was like 30 years ago. So,
Oh,
Oh
man.
man.
Pierce, because we know that Americans were receiving a massive number of unwanted calls, the robocalls, spoof calls, whatever you want to call them. Could you tell our audience a little bit about global call authentication and how Numerical is going about, the work in this, and also looking at international calls?
yeah. So, the work that Numerical, I'll just start there. The work that Numerical doing is mostly, well, it's in two main areas, I would say. One thrust is, standards development, and that's a place that I'm active, and then also influencing regulators. And so we're a member of quite a few different standards development organizations, and we also have membership on the Network Interoperability Consultative Committee in the UK. And then also I'm a member, well, not just myself, Sarah Delphi, and Brett Nemiroff are all contributing to a couple of work groups of the FCC's North American Numbering Council. So we're active in standards and regulatory development, and then we're also doing some commercial development associated with something that was announced at the SIP Forum's SIP Network Operators Conference, the SIPNOC conference back in September, I think. So they announced an initiative they call branded caller identity, and it's based on using rich call data claims in stir shake and call authentication to transport verified identity information and display that on the device to help people know who's calling and the reason for calling. I think as far as the international part was, I wanted to mention that that there's work, for folks who aren't necessarily familiar with all the work that's going on for international call authentication. I wanted to call out different standards and regulatory work that's been going on that might be of interest to them. So in the International Telecommunications Union, there's been some recent work from the Brazil regulators actually to talk about the stir shake and authentication they want to do to support telemarketers. They are plagued even more than Americans, or at least as much as Americans, with illegal robocalls. And the telemarketers thought if they were to use call authentication, they could differentiate the traffic that is legitimate from the telemarketers in Brazil from the illegitimate telemarketers that are making calls to Brazilian citizens. And I think that was brilliant. I thought that that was a really thoughtful way to implement stir shake. And it wasn't just go make the service provider sign so they knew who to do enforcement against. It was actually to try and protect traffic. And I think that was an important differentiation from the way stir shaken has been deployed in the US, Canada, and France. And I'll just mention internationally, right now, it's in US, Canada, and France. And France had an interesting, they did some interesting things. Their version of stir shaken is not interoperable with Canada and the US. So there's a lot of work to figure out, okay, what do we do going forward to make sure that that doesn't happen too often, right? We don't need a global set of non-interoperable call authentication. And one of the organizations that's stepping forward to try and help with that, to get things rationalized, is the i3 Forum, who's been promoting a thing that they call One Consortium. And there's going to be, I think, a launch of that One Consortium in the first quarter of next year. So it's something to watch. It's the only international organization I know of that's really tried to be holistic about what would be needed for service providers, national regulators, etc. So we're hoping that we can influence good outcomes for enterprises and agencies who I think will benefit most from call authentication, at least initially. The IETF is working on STIR, of course, but they're also working on various ways of using verifiable credentials encoded using JSON. So it's it's an international community in the IETF, so it's important that they're looking at things not just from the STIR perspective that was used for STIR Shaken, but more broadly, the various ways that authenticated credentials can be used. And then I think the last thing I would mention is that well, there's two things. One is the ADIS IPNNI, same folks who developed Shaken are working on a cross-border document to help other jurisdictions understand how they could implement STIR Shaken to work with the US and Canada especially. And then also, as you remember from our meeting in October with the IPNNI, the DLT working group has been promoting consideration for how verifiable credentials could interwork with a certificate-based public key infrastructure for call authentication. And then the FCC has a current work in the call authentication trust anchor working group to look at roamers and ways that roamers, their calls back to the US especially could be protected. Because if they implement a rule that tells the gateway providers apply analytics, block calls that are using US telephone numbers in the calling number, and we're going to hurt the roamers. So we need to figure out what to do about that. And call authentication is a tool in the toolbox for consideration. And that's it for my view on global call authentication at this point.
So it's good to hear that. Good to hear it pointed out that now it seems more globally. It's like, okay, things are being done. And I like the way that you phrase it. There's going to be versions of these authentications, you know, whether it's STIR Shaken or a version of it or whatever it might be called.
Yeah, so something else that we know you've been working on is verifiable identity display. Could you tell us and our audience what this might look like in the future and how your company is integrating it into their system?
So there for verified identity display, I would say that the initial efforts, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, are mostly commercial, right? So it's meaning that it wasn't driven by regulatory or standards requirements to do a verified identity display, but people were looking at the fact that they're, verified, or I should call it branded calling. There's been lots of different ways to approach branded calling meaning that you might show that a call was from a particular company and you have not just their name, but maybe you show their logo and maybe a reason for calling as well. And so there's been various ways that information has been worked on to be able to display to consumers. So some analytics providers have developed over-the-top application clients that you can download and put onto your phone, and the phone can learn information about calls that are coming to you because the campaigns are planned. And so the information can be made available to the phone before the call gets there. And then when the call gets there, it can be displayed. And insofar as the people that are providing that branded calling have done a good job of know your customer and customer due diligence to ensure that the people purchasing that service are trustworthy and that the content that they're displaying is valid, authentic, and not violating any trademarks or obscene or anything like that, then you can get a verified identity display, albeit over the top. Which some people don't like to download apps, and it's not necessarily available at every service provider, and so there's pockets of where this is available. And that's one of the other things, is that this idea of branded calling and identity display, because there aren't standards, because there aren't regulations, there's been various approaches used by various people. So there's not an easy way for an enterprise or a government agency or anybody else who might want to be able to purchase that ability to display that to their people they're calling. Makes it a very frothy, complicated environment. But that's, I think, okay, because people are exploring various ways to do things, and that creates competition, and that usually benefits the consumers, right? So it may be complicated at first, it may be difficult for people to work with at first, but I think it will all work out over time. So some of the things that were used, just to give you a little bit of the technology behind it. I mentioned one, which was an analytics provided over the top client. Google also had a service that they had for their Pixel, where they would do what was called a pre-call API. So if you were going to call a customer and you knew they had a Pixel phone, you could do an API call to the Google API service, and then it would push that information. You had to register, you had to be known to Google, but then they would push that information to the phone just before the time of the call, and the phone would be able to display it. Google took that service down at the beginning of this year, but there are other people that are looking at, I'll just call them pre-call APIs, ways of getting verified identity information to the device that it can be displayed at the time of the call. And then lastly, the one that we've been working on is with the CTIA, and that's the one that they announced at the SIP Forums, SIPNOC, back in September. That uses stir shaken call authentication technology, but the verified identity part really just comes from the good old know your customer due diligence. The customers have to register, they have to be identified, they have to know the identity of them, and then the same thing has to go on for the content that they would want to display. So there's an ecosystem of vetting and onboarding and other stuff to go on. So it's a holistic view of how to do that. And I think the part that I like the most about it is that it's based on call authentication standards, so that we're leveraging the work that was done for stir shaken, but in this case for a commercial purpose, for verified identity display.
I guess, Pierce, in a nutshell, caller ID authentication technology, it's used to enable subscribers to trust that the callers are who they say they are. So for our audience, can you basically say what's the point? Can you tell us more about using identity to protect that end user?
Yeah, and it's not just protecting the end user either, right? Because it's both. It's the caller and the called party who can be protected, because a lot of the spoofing and scamming that goes on harms large companies that don't like their identities being spoofed, right? So Microsoft, Amazon, banks, large corporations are having their reputation damaged by people who are spoofing and scamming them, or scamming their customers, right?
Right.
And then so the call authentication, for folks who aren't familiar with what call authentication is, it's the idea that you take some metadata from the call, like the calling number, the called number, maybe some other stuff. If you want to add in some rich call data, you might have some information about the reason that they're calling, a reference to the image that's the logo for the company, and then the name of the company. And then you apply what's called a cryptographic signature to it. So you take that metadata, you drop it into an algorithm that pops out a block of data, and then you use a algorithm to sign it. And then at the far end, a verifier can look to see that that information is authentic and unchanged from the point where it was signed, and so they know it has integrity. So insofar as the system has provided good information at the point of signature, then you know that you have good information at the termination. Right. So the protection for the consumer side and for the business side. For the business side, you're trying to protect their reputation so that they can make calls that people know it's definitely them, and anything else that looks like them but doesn't have that same level of authentication can be weeded out, hopefully, by the analytics. The other thing is that even if you weren't trying to do branding, right? Even if you were just saying, all I'm going to do is authenticate myself, you'll know it was me. That's useful to the analytics, because they can say, well, there's no branding here, but I know that this came from Bank of America or whoever it might be. Right. And so they can protect it from being labeled or blocked. So labeling and blocking is good for blocking illegal robocallers, but it also accidentally blocks a lot of good calls, and that harms the callers as well as the called parties. You might miss, notifications about drugs, your prescriptions, or meetings, or lots of things, right? So it's important to protect those calls. At the terminating side, for the called party, they want, there's calls that they want to be able to know more about who's calling them, and they want to feel comfortable that calling information is reliable. So that's the whole idea behind the verified identity for call protection. But as I'm trying to say, not very well, there's verified identity that can be used for branded calling, but there could also be verified identity that isn't really doing anything about branding. It's just protecting that call from accidental labeling or blocking.
That's exactly right. And it seems like more and more, most people think of robocalls as, the unwanted, the ones that are trying to sell you a car warranty, or the IRS, they're all some type of scam. And a lot of people don't think, and I'm glad you brought it up, of the legal robocalls, such as my kids are in school and they need to notify me of something, a mass notification to schools, prescriptions, whatever it might be. So, I had one the other day that just started up, and it was a robocall, but it was a weather warning. I was used to the text or the whatever, but now they're doing calls on that. Hey, you have a flash flood warning or something like that. But so I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there is a bit of a misunderstanding sometimes that robocalls are not always a bad thing. There are legitimate good ones. So last part of this show really for you is, and you may agree or disagree, when we go to conferences, when we go into meetings, you could even go into a meeting at Numerical and you talk to people, shake hands, kiss babies, do all that stuff. But at the end of the day, do you really know that person? And sometimes we've decided we go to these conferences and you don't really get to know who this person truly is. So it's kind of like branded calling, but on a more personal basis. So the data scientists in 1Route have come up with a questionnaire, and we are going to find out who Pierce Gorman really is. Are you ready?
Boy. Yeah, I'm terrified, but yeah.
All right, Pierce, here we go. Number 1, what is your most unpopular food opinion? In other words, what is something that you really like or really dislike that everybody would disagree with you on?
Unpopular food opinion. I think it'd be amongst my family, and it would be that I like fish.
Fish,
And,
okay, yeah.
Yep, because a lot of people don't like fish.
That's understandable. I like peanut butter and cheese. And that is apparently a highly debatable topic in my house. So
That's really funny, because a lot of times you can get those variety cracker packs that have
thank you.
cheese and peanut butter, right?
That's a good point. It's a really good point.
I have to tell you, my youngest daughter, she eats ketchup with everything, and I'm looking over one day and she's dipping apple slices in ketchup and just eating it. And she's like, "Dad, you gotta try this." And being the dad I am, I guess, okay, I'll give it a try. So yeah, apples and ketchup to me taste like V8.
Oh,
That makes sense.
that's kind of funny. Is that a compliment, or
I
I don't know?
don't know.
Yeah.
Depends on if you mix it with something, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is one thing that you own that you really should throw out?
The chair I'm sitting in. I'm not getting up so you can see it, but it is a ratty piece of furniture. It's got to go.
It's
Oh
broken.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. It was, I mean, it's just an office chair, but it's an inexpensive one. And I almost never used it until COVID. We all had to go home and work from home. And now it's worse for the wear.
What unconventional animal do you wish you could have as a pet?
I'm kind of tired of having pets, actually. I think it would probably be a crab.
There you go.
That's unconventional.
Yeah.
But, they don't make noise. I'm not going to worry about cleaning up too much behind them. They're not likely to come out of the aquarium and cause any problems and make the neighbors unhappy, or me.
There you go.
Yeah.
I like it.
What is the best ice cream flavor?
Gold medal ribbon.
I'm gonna have to write it down.
It's a Baskin Robbins flavor. And I think it's their most popular.
There you go.
Okay. What's in it?
It's vanilla chocolate and caramel, and it's all kind
Ooh.
of not blended together, but it's like swirled together.
Yeah,
I miss Baskin Robbins. I had that
me
in the town I
too.
grew up in. Don't have one here, so yeah,
Yeah,
31 flavors, and
yep,
that's the best one.
that's my favorite. Yep.
Wow.
Have you ever asked someone for their autograph?
Yes, a guy named Dr. Fishbeck, and he was a meteorologist in Albuquerque, New Mexico when I was a kid. And he was very active in scouting, especially with Native Americans in New Mexico.
Oh yeah.
And I was on a scouting trip up in the mountains, the Jemez Mountains in New Mexico. And I was just out hiking with some buddies, and we came across Dr. Fishbeck and a bunch of Native American scouts. And we chit-chatted for a while, and I asked for his autograph and got his autograph. And he drew a picture of a fish and wrote Beck next to it.
Oh, that's funny.
That's good.
What was the last book that you read?
A Pirate of Exquisite Mind. I think that's the name of it. A Pirate of Exquisite Mind. And it's about a guy named William Dampier. He's an interesting fellow because of other pirates and other people that he was around. One of the most famous pirates is a guy named Avery. And I think it's William Avery. Can't remember. Anyway, William Avery took over a ship that William Dampier was on, and William Dampier and the captain got off and they went, somewhere else. But William Dampier, I think it was back in the 1600s, he circumnavigated the earth 3 times. Now, sometimes he was with pirates, other times he wasn't. It's just commercial ventures. But that
Little
was an
overachiever.
amazing accomplishment. Well, and he kept journals and
Okay.
he kept information about everything that he did as he went around the world. And then he published one of the very first travel guides, and it was extremely popular back like in the
Wow.
1600s,
There you
1700s.
go. He's the first
So that was a book
Expedia.
I did not select. My brother-in-law sent that to me for Christmas last year. That was a really
There
good
you
book.
go. If you had to eat a crayon, what color would you eat?
Having maybe tasted crayons at one time in my life, I think maybe the lighter color ones tasted better, and that the ones with a lot of color were a little more bitter. So I would probably go with white or yellow.
There you go.
That makes sense.
Don't eat yellow crayons or yellow snow.
Yeah. Frank Zappa would be proud.
Yeah. Would you rather time travel to the past or the future?
Definitely the past.
Okay.
There you go. Little shout out to Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Yeah. The future could be very cool too. I think
If you hang around long enough, you'll see it anyways. So you might as well go backwards.
Yeah, well, okay.
What's your favorite nickname someone has given you, and how did you get it?
My favorite nickname that somebody gave me was Bierce. And it was a accidental nickname. I had a boss who's from Egypt, and he had a little difficulty pronouncing Pierce. And one of my coworkers was from Lebanon, and he just thought it was hilarious that the guy from Egypt, because they both have accents, right?
Right.
But the guy from Egypt had trouble pronouncing P, and so the guy from Lebanon just loved it and started calling me Bierce all the time. He still calls me. He sent me like a Happy Thanksgiving thing, and he signed it, Happy Thanksgiving, Bierce. So, anyway.
Do you believe in ghosts? And if you do, have you ever seen one?
No and no.
This is short
Easy.
and sweet there. All right, Pierce. Would you rather live the rest of your life in total sunlight or in total darkness?
I don't know if you can hear the dog, but total sunlight.
There you go.
Me too. If you had to work a completely different role at your company, what would it be?
I think it would be to try to mature. It's not that we're not mature, but I think it would be to try to. So how do I want to put this? We're doing a lot of very interesting development right now, but we're a small company, right? So over time, assuming we're successful, and I think we will be, what you see as organizations grow is they end up with some differentiation, right? Where I'm not going to say silos, but you divide work so that there's a more, how should I put it, more quality effort put into doing a particular kind of work. And in my experience with Sprint, I spent a bunch of years working on telecommunications testing and development, right? So I worked with developers that were developing either applications for customers or applications to monitor and manage the network. And so I'm very familiar with what it's like to try and take something from concept and research development to production, and then production support. And I think if I was going to do another role, I think what I would want to do is help build that professional level of R&D, development, production support.
There you go.
Well, they're going to do it with or without me, but that would be something I would be interesting to do. I'd rather do what I'm doing, but that would be something that would be
right.
You get one song to listen to for the rest of your life. What song would that be?
How about Beethoven's Ninth?
Okay.
It's a symphony. It's not an 8 song.
I was about to say, I asked my wife this question and she said, the Four Seasons. It's like, you get something different throughout the. It's like, okay, that's kind of cheating, but we'll take it. Beethoven.
What is the weirdest fact that you know?
Okay, I know what it is.
Most random.
This is totally random. I know all of the auxiliary verbs.
Okay.
There you go.
You want to hear them? I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Is, am, are, was, were, be, being, been, has, have, had, do, does, did, shall, will, should, would, may, might, must, can, could. That's all the auxiliary verbs.
You should put that in your pronouns.
I hate the 8th grade teacher that made me memorize it. I've never forgotten it.
I'm impressed.
That is. Describe the rest of your life in 5 words.
Oh, haiku.
Here, we'll count them for you.
Drama-free travel and family.
Oh, you get one more.
Drama-free travel and family.
Oh, and gosh. That'll work. Pierce Gorman, you are now a known man. So all that's left to do is roll out the red carpet for you, sir. Look into the camera and tell us, what does the future hold for Pierce? Since you're going to the past and not looking into the future.
Yeah, what does the future hold? Well, I'll tell you what I hope it holds, right? So I'm towards the end of the career, pretty obviously, right, from the gray hair. I'm very excited about where things are and where they're going in terms of authenticated communications for voice, for text, for branded calling, for restoring or creating trust. And I was joking with my wife about, I wonder how many people actually remember when it was trustworthy, right? A lot of young people like, what do you mean trusted calls? I don't know what you're talking about. It's never existed in my lifetime. What do you mean restore trust? So there's that, and then there's some other stuff like, nuclear fusion may become commercially feasible, electricity get cheap, all sorts of interesting, fun things can happen in the future. But for me, what I hope is that my work in authenticated communications is fruitful. And for folks who don't know, I am a proponent of looking at verifiable credentials, which are JSON web tokens. I think that they're a much more flexible format for authenticating communications than what we've used for Stir Shaken, which is X.509 security certificate. So
there you go.
I'm hopeful that the last couple of years of my career will see that come to fruition. That's
well said. Well said, sir. So thank you so much to our audience. Be sure to go check out Numerical, check out Pierce, follow their stuff. They have a Pierce, correct me if I'm wrong, Tuesday Talks. I know Numerical's got that going on in the podcast world, so go check them out. Numerical's doing great things. Pierce is doing amazing things. And while you're at it, go ahead and like, subscribe, Instaface, tweet, chat, whatever, X these days. The 1Route Roundup that we've got going on in the country spotlights. One last time, Pierce, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you and Numerical for the work that y'all are doing in the industry. So
You bet. You're welcome,
appreciate
and
you.
happy holidays.
You as well. All right. Thank you, everybody.